This Sunday, we can continue and actually end our sermon series on vision casting. And we're at the point of a 3-week real kind of progression. The first week, we've talked about growing deep, putting down deep roots in our soil, our faith. Then we talked about branching out, to spread our arms, to reach out and bring folks in, to spread out and do good works in our community, to branch out beyond just us. This week we're going to talk about bearing fruit. Bearing fruit. I've told the story before about the pear tree that my daddy bought online and planted, and it never bore fruit. And he burned it down and salted it. And I told Daddy one time, I said, that's the only time I really saw you act so much like Jesus. You may say, really? The point I'm trying to make is that Jesus himself was clear about us being fruit bearers, that we have an obligation to bear fruit. That if we are healthy, if we are who God calls us to be, if we're doing what we are called to do, we will bear much fruit. It's not optional. It's not partial. We all are called to bear much fruit. Now, there's different kinds of fruits, right? How many of you in Vacation Bible School or Sunday school at some point in time learned a little song called The Fruit of the Spirit? Fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, mercy, and self-control, right? Well, there is another one, right? They go, the fruit of the Spirit's not a kiwi. Y'all know that one? Right, Shelby? The fruit of the Spirit's not a kiwi. Anyway, we sing about the fruit of the Spirit. Those are the good things that we bear in our lives when we're attached, as the vine is attached to the root of God's love. That means it develops within us these certain characteristics: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. When we cultivate those things and they grow in our life, it changes who we are. It changes our very nature. Now, how we get those is always God interworking with us. Any of y'all ever prayed for patience? Right? It's always dangerous because what you got to go through to earn the patience, to get there. I heard a great art historian talk about all the great sculptures throughout time. And the way he described it is, my job is to chip away the things that are not. The things that are not. That in that block of granite, there was already Michelangelo's David. And Michelangelo just chipped away the parts that were not. And God works within us, chipping away the parts that are not like Him, if we let Him. If we let Him. But I want us to push this idea, because that's a lot of what we think the fruit, being fruitful and fruit bearing is about. Is about us becoming more like Jesus, and it's absolutely true, to bear the fruit of the Spirit. But there's another part of this here, and it's kind of like that pear tree. We also bear fruit in the good works that we do. Now, when Methodism started, we were accused of being Pelagians. Now, do y'all know what a Pelagian is? If you went through confirmation with me, you know what a Pelagian is. It's people that believed that we earned our salvation. A works-based righteousness. And that is in absolute contradiction to the concept of in faith alone. But Methodists are not Pelagians. We're not even semi-Pelagians. We do not believe in a works-based righteousness. It's very clear. We believe in grace. Look at somebody and say grace. Grace. We believe in grace and mercy. Look at somebody and say mercy. Mercy. Right? We believe in those two things. But here's what Wesley said. Works, not works-based righteousness, but works that follow righteousness. That there are things that we do that naturally flow out of a forgiven heart that has been reconciled with God, that has been made new, and is being led towards bearing the fruit of the Spirit. There's just things that come about as proof and evidence of our faith. How many of you have ever worked at a food pantry? Been on a mission trip? Right? How many of you ever raked leaves for somebody that couldn't because the church was sponsoring that? Yeah? Right? How many of you ever cooked a meal for somebody that was sick and took it to them? Right? Visited somebody that was sick. Went to the hospital. Right? How many of you have written a note for the pastoral care committee and mailed it to somebody? Right? But you don't have to just be a part of that team. I know a person in this church that sends out birthday cards to every person he knows. Every time. That's just what one of his ministries is. We are to have fruit. God expects us to bear fruit in our lives. It's not what saves us. We don't work to save ourselves by doing good works, but it is the overflow of that Spirit inside of us, right? Did your grandmother ever just hug you really big? Right? Just hugged you, and just, hugged you like only a grandmama can, right? Mine had an apron she wore. Anybody still wear aprons? So she had it. Curtis wears an apron sometimes. Okay. We're going to talk. My grandmother, when I was little, would grab that apron and just wrap it around me. I loved it. Do you think that my grandmama did that to get me to love her? No, she did it because of an overflow of love for me. And when we love God sufficiently, out of the overflow of our hearts, we will act. And it'll come out in so many ways. It'll be coming out in our compassion for people, our care for people, our hearts breaking for people that we might not even know. It pours out in our language and how we treat each other and what we say to each other. Yes, kindness is a fruit of the Spirit, but it also overflows in works of doing good things. Service to the kingdom. I've always struggled talking about money. And usually when we talk about stewardship, we're talking about money. I've learned to do it. I believe it's important. How we handle our funds is very indicative of where we are in our relationship with God. But I'm not talking about money today. Right? So take your hand off your wallet. The preacher's not talking about it. When I was a kid, my daddy said, if the preacher's coming, put your hand on your wallet. I want to talk to you about the wallet of your heart. I want to talk to you about doing. Look at somebody and say, doing. There's really two types of Christians, right? And neither one of them is better than the other. There are the doers and the beers. The doers are the folks that are filled with energy and really work and do things, and they're always there and always doing things. They're really comfortable with doing things for God. Right? That's me. I'm a doer. You know what I always wanted to be, Pat? I wanted to be a beer. Somebody that could just sit in God's presence, bask in their glow, meditate on the Holy Scriptures hours and hours and hours, and write wonderful books with deep. I wanted to be Thomas Merton. I wanted to be Billy Graham. I wanted to be, if you never read Billy Graham, Billy's deep, right? He could write some deep stuff. He was a theologian. I wanted to be somebody that could sit for days and just ponder God's greatness. And I can sit for about 5 minutes. Right? I'm not a good beer. I'm saying all that to say to you, whether you're a beer or a doer, you are still a fruit bearer. Look at somebody and say fruit bearer. Okay, not a bear, bear, fruit bearer, right? I'm not talking about gummy bears, although I like gummy bears. Way too much. Y'all do too? Y'all like gummy bears? Which ones do you like? Do you like the soft, squishy ones, or do you like to let them sit out and get stale and they be almost dried up? Who likes the dried up, stale ones? Holly Sparks back there, and Hallie Hendry, right? How many of you like them really squishy? Okay. God likes all of us, whether we're squishy bears or we're dried up, crusty bears. God likes us both. Why? Because we're bearing fruit. Y'all remember the parable of the fig tree? Jesus is walking into Jerusalem, and there's a fig tree there, and it's not bearing fruit. And Jesus says, I'm going to curse it, and it'll die. And the owner of the tree persuades him, give me another year, I'll work harder on it. Right? Jesus, who is God, took and takes very seriously the concept of bearing fruit. For me and for you. I watched the men out here working the other day, cleaning out that back area, right? Y'all working hard, right? And putting together shelves. I think about the people that get here and make coffee, that set things up, the baristas. I think about all the different committees that make things work, that y'all are providing food for Miss Bobby's family. I think about the folks that just come in and wipe things down or hand out bulletins, or those of us that were folding bulletins this morning, right? Jerry, how's that paper cut? You good? Yeah. He said, it's all right. Right? I think about all of those folks that are actively doing things. I'm so blessed to know you because you are a doing church. Now, I want to encourage you, don't forsake the being for the doing, but don't so focus on the doing that you miss the being. There has to be balance there. Does that make sense? God is calling us to bear fruit. I think that is in good works. I think that's in volunteering in the church. But let me say that I think it's also in reaching folks for Jesus Christ. Because isn't that the greatest fruit? Isn't that the greatest fruit? It's when somebody who never knew Jesus forms a relationship. Or maybe somebody that fell out of relationship with Jesus by they got hurt in the church, or maybe they just, like so many of us, kind of wandered away for a while. and they finally find a place to wander back. Isn't that the great blessing of fruit bearing? Is to see those folks, or to see young people, teenagers, make a commitment to Christ in their life. Look, we're not going to get it right. We're not always going to bear good fruit. Right? Sometimes it looks pretty, but we didn't do a good job. I'm there. You're there. We do things. I'll give you an example. I made a real mess of a soup a couple years ago, and it was so bad I had to pour it out. And do you know how much it hurts me to pour food away? Like, that's like, oh. Right? Poured out because it was so bad. We're not going to get it right all the time. We're going to make mistakes. We might take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But we keep plugging along. We keep plugging along. When I was pastor in Richmond, Kentucky, I got to know a lady that eventually died, and I got to minister to her in her waning hours. And she'd been praying for her daughter for 25 years. And you might say her daughter had really made a mess of things in her life. A lot of bad decisions. A lot of living far away from Christ. A lot of not so good fruit. And she'd been praying for years. And shortly before her death, that daughter made a step back to faith. Not in my church. In a church called Quest Community Church. Remember that one, Holly? Over at that time, they were in a bunch of batting cages. They were meeting in batting cages. They were a new church plant. It was a church plant that got started in an Applebee's on Sunday morning. But that daughter found her way back to faith. Man, that's good fruit. Right? That's Granny Smith apples sliced up with caramel sauce, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about? That's really good fruit. That's ripe muscadines off the vine. Blackberries from down on the blackberry patch. I want to be a fruit bearer. I want to bear much fruit for the kingdom. I hope you do too.